We'd like to welcome Ted Kyle, past OAC chair and founder of ConsciousHealth, to the OAC TV broadcast. We're here to talk about the word obesity. Is this a bad word? I wanted to start off, for those tuning in right now, and even for us here in OAC TV studios, can you define obesity? What is the definition of the word obesity?
Well, that's really a good place to start, James, because it's in misunderstanding what that word is all about where we find all of our troubles with that word. Some people think that it's an insult. Some people think that obesity is defined by size or BMI, and that's not true. BMI is defined by the accumulation of either excess or unhealthy fat tissue that harms a person's health. A BMI can be an indicator that maybe there's something going on, but it's nothing more than a signal. What it's really about is health. And sometimes weight follows health, and sometimes weight doesn't really tell you all that much about health. But people get stuck on weight and can't really talk about the complex chronic disease that is obesity just because of that misunderstanding.
Yeah, so I think it's safe to say that we really have to do a better job at separating the medical term from the societal stigma. And in fact, Liz Paul in our chat says, I think it's difficult. What's difficult is when physicians and society view the word obesity as a moral failing as opposed to a disease. Correct use of the term and clarity for use for people reclaims it for me. So I think she's kind of echoing where we're really going with this conversation here, that we have to do a better job at separating the stigma that's associated with it and looking at it as a disease.
Yeah.
I think back 20 years when people did not want to talk about a diagnosis of cancer. Well, more than 20 years, more like 50 years. And it wasn't until Betty Ford revealed that she had breast cancer that people started to feel okay about disclosing that they had this condition. Before that, it was like, I'm going to feel shunned if I tell people that this is something that I'm struggling with. The problem with obesity is that people think that they can diagnose it visually. They think that they can look at somebody and judge their health. And that's just a serious mistake.
Yeah, so Ted, I think what you're pointing to, where we're maybe going to get, is the fact that it took some brave souls to stand up and to kind of really champion something that, to change that perception of a word or a diagnosis, if you will, right? So I think we'll get to that in just a moment. It's a good call to action to folks, because I think we're also channeling our, last time we talked about these topics was with Lisa Schaefer, and she was very much a champion of saying we need to reclaim the word obesity, right? And I think another reflection to share as we kind of dig into this is Ken shares that he doesn't think obesity is a bad word, but that the word has a negative connotation, but it shouldn't. And I know this is something that you feel very passionate about I think I reference as a slur, right? It's become a slur more than anything. So maybe speak a little bit to how we have taken the word obesity from a medical term, but society has made it something that is used as an insult.
Well, that's exactly right. People experience obesity in very, very different ways. There are people who have experienced weight bias and stigma all their lives, and that word gets thrown at them by strangers who know nothing about their health, who have no business commenting on their health, but it becomes a tool for folks who want to say, oh, I'm really concerned about you. Well, no, as a matter of fact, they aren't, because they are complete strangers and really don't have a full insight. And mind health is not anybody else's business, as a matter of fact. But because of that misuse of the word, it does get turned into an identity or a personal failing. And that's where I draw a bright red line between the word obese, which is a label, and in many contexts that is a slur, and obesity, which is a medical condition.
Yeah.
I think that distinction there is so important. I know you're a huge champion of people first language, so am I. I mean, there's so many times where you see that word obese and how it's used, and it is used in a derogatory way. Again, we don't refer to people with cancer as cancerous. But yet with obesity, that's still very, very common for us to see that. And, I think oftentimes in these discussions, we want to provide people with tangible things that they can do when it comes to reclaiming the word, changing the mindset of this. How are we going to change the negative connotation to the word obesity? What is it that we could do as an organization? What is it that folks can do? They're tuning in right now to help do that.
I think two things are possible. One is to really help people understand what obesity really is, that it's not a dietary problem, that it's not a behavioral problem, but that it's a problem of physiology, plain and simple. And something that I'm fond of saying is that the fact is that obesity is highly heritable. Your genes set the table for the environment for obesity, and the environment serves it up. It's not either or; it's both and. But the choices, the personal choices that people like to blame obesity for, actually kind of come after the fact. It's when you have genes that make you susceptible to obesity, when you're living in an environment that triggers it, then you have a decision to make about, okay, so how can I deal with that? And that's the second part of what we need to do. People need to realize, which most people don't because of all this bias about obesity, that there are ways that you can manage obesity, and the treatment for obesity, the options that people have for dealing with obesity are getting better all the time. There's a lot of talk right now about game-changing therapies for obesity, and so we are making progress. And just as I've seen with other diseases that didn't have a lot of good treatments, those stigmatized diseases for which there aren't good options become less stigmatized when people have better options.
Yeah, you speak so much to kind of the root of so much of it's hard to find a solution to this, right? But understanding through education and awareness sounds like it's a really key part of all of this, because the word obesity is thrown around, I think, in the circles that we keep up with in terms of a medical, right, in a medical nature, right? We refer to it as that, but I don't think that the society's there yet to understand when we say obesity. We're serious about that. We're not using it as a term that's meant to be derogatory, but it's medical. So separating that medical, but I think through that awareness and understanding is, I think, where you're drawing those key points.
Right, and it's the implicit that becomes the implicit attitudes, the things that are never even spoken that really cause the problems here. Just like, 10 years ago, more than today, but still today, people use that word obese, where you wouldn't use that with other diseases. And people aren't trying to be nasty when they do it. It's just an expression of what's operating in the back of their mind when they think about someone who might be living with obesity. They think, well, they're obese. Well, no, that's not who I am. I'm Ted. And the obesity that is part of me and part of my family, that's really just one tiny dimension of my life experience.
Yeah, and I think here, even in the chat, there's so many comments right now. And Kelsey says, it depends on who uses it and how they use it. So if it's my physician discussing my health, then no. If it's a stranger at a clothing store, yes. And I think that goes back to what you said at the beginning of this topic discussion, Ted, is that it's not for anyone's place to make a diagnosis of obesity based on someone's visual appearance. You're not helping that person. And so I think it's important that we, as a society, recognize there is a place for the word obesity, but it's not, to Kelsey's point, in a clothing store.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we need healthcare professionals to lead the way. And there is the fastest growing specialty in medicine is obesity medicine. And it is these specialists that really understand this complex chronic disease and are helping to be a starting point for getting the word out about what this is and what it's not. And I see a difference, but those implicit attitudes, those words that are never necessarily spoken, are slow to change.
Well, and I think that's why I can get pretty energized by the work OAC does, and that, you, Ted, and the work you do is in your leadership here and throughout all of our committees here. These are the things that we work on all the time, because if OAC didn't exist, who would be the people who would organize these voices to stand up and demand better and demand change and demand respect, right? I think we talk a lot about separating the word obesity as a medical term to also being able to talk about obesity respectfully. And, Liz shares that for her, it matters more about how people are saying the word, and their intent means more than the words themselves. And I think, keeping this spirit of conversation about this topic, continuing to talk about it and pressing on it is where I see us having the greatest advantage as people being able to raise our voices for this, which is, I would think you would agree, would be what is going to really drive that change we want to see.
You're absolutely right, Kristy. I think back probably about 10 years ago when the board was having a retreat, and at that time, Rebecca Poole, who is the world's foremost researcher on weight bias and stigma, was sitting there at the table with us, and we started talking about people first language. And Rebecca said, just frankly, that she had gotten so much pushback from medical journals when she tried to use people first language in her articles. Obesity kept getting changed from obesity to obese. Patients with obesity would be changed into obese persons. And she said, they just make me want to throw up my hands and give up. But what made the difference was having vocal, strong advocates with that lived experience saying, no, 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 that's not right. I'm a real person. I am not obese. I am a human being. And I expect respect. And this is my story. And it's that personal, firsthand story that has made all the difference in the world. And increasingly, you're seeing that condition first language, that language of the obese, disappear from medical journals. It's not completely gone, but it's disappearing. And that is definitely the hard work of everybody at the OAC and the advocates who are brave enough to stand up and say, no, we're not going to put up with this.
Yeah, Ted, and I think as we bring this topic to a close, some key takeaways here. So obesity is not a bad word. Obesity is a chronic medical condition, a disease. It's a medical term. We need to respect the word obesity. The problem with it is that it's been used in the wrong way, and even worse, when obese is used, that doesn't help the problem. But I think one thing you hit on that's so important is we need to understand the science of obesity. You talked earlier about genetics and environment. I think we kind of bring out those three buckets for those that are tuning in. Again, I really think those are the 3 points that we'd want people to have as their main takeaways. Is there anything that we missed that you would want to share with folks before we wrap up?
No, I would just say that everybody doesn't have to be a scientist, but it's worthwhile for everybody to know that obesity is not a choice. It is a condition that people inherit. It is a condition that is triggered by the environment that we live in. And the only choice we have is, okay, what do I want to do about it? And we all deserve respect as human beings. 42% of the population is living with obesity. And so you really can't dismiss that many human beings as being somehow fatally flawed.
Well, and I love that also, that reflection that you shared. I do remember that retreat when Dr. Rebecca Poole talked about this, and it was probably about a decade ago, but look how much progress I think we have made from just not only this adoption of people first language, but I think we're also seeing industry kind of champion this is a collective group effort, right? It takes, the most important voices are the ones viewing, right? The patients, right? But it's nice to have the professionals and folks really championing this. So I do think this is the spirit of building this coalition to make a difference in this realm. So I love that you pointed to that. I do remember that very vividly, but also the progress has been really key.
Yes, that was a real moment. And those journals that were giving Rebecca grief about people first language have now set up standards that say we expect manuscripts to be submitted with people first language.
That's amazing.
So it's been a 180.
Yeah. Love hearing that. Ted, so good to see you as usual.
Thank you, Ted.
We were so surprised you hadn't been on our broadcast yet. You have so much wisdom to share with everybody. So please come back and join us for another thought-provoking topic.
I'm yours always.
Thanks, Ted, so much.
Ted.
Good to see you.
Thank you.
Take care.